All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I think we're gonna get started so we have enough time to get through our agenda today. I know people are still trickling in, but I'm starting with the opening remarks so we have a little bit of time to for people to slowly trickle into the attendee room. Welcome to the side event, Atlantic Contributions to the Global Ocean Observing System, as part of the All-Atlantic Research and Innovation for Sustainable Ocean Ministerial High-Level and Stakeholder Conference. Just a quick tech intro, you have entered in attendee mode, so you're muted and your videos are off. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We will allow for questions after the presentations are concluded and we have a panel discussion later. We would appreciate if you could just put the questions in there. That way it's a little easier to track them and make sure that we are answering all of them. If we don't get to your questions, we will record everything and then forward the questions to the panelists and speakers and make sure that we follow up with you. All right, let's get started. The United Nations General Assembly has proclaimed the next decade to be the UN Decade of Ocean Science and Sustainable Development. And yesterday was the UN Decade Kickoff Conference, and where we received input from all over the globe, spearheading a time of change over the next decade to foster collaboration and joining forces between research and stakeholders, including indigenous communities, policymakers, the private sector, and society. And the key goal of the UN Decade is to create the science we need for the ocean we want. A few things that I wanted to bring to your attention that were raised yesterday during the kickoff were a presentation by Ken Paul of the Wolastoqey Nation in Canada, and he highlighted the value of the ecosystem and that often research is used to maximize economic benefit, but should rather be used to inform decision-making and sustainability. And that our job is now to make positive steps to make positive solutions in the long run, and encouraged us to think 7 generations ahead. Dr. Alva Escobar-Briones noted that the success of the UN Decade requires people to understand how important oceans are for the planet and life in general, and to build from local to national to regional to a global scale, and the need to imagine the transformation with great inclusivity and equity. And science is there to help and inform, and not every region is equal in knowledge that it obtains, and is able to obtain and has the infrastructure. So we need to work together to make all of this happen. We want to build upon this momentum and create it through initiatives like the UN Decade, and for the Atlantic specifically, the Belém and Galway Statement, which are 2 high-level documents and agreements that bring together partners across the Atlantic Basin on science matters, outreach activities, and fostering long-lasting partnerships for a collaborative way forward. This is not an insignificant goal that will take time to implement, and meetings like this through the All-Atlantic2021 Conference, initiatives like the UN Decade, the Belém and Galway Statement are key in fostering and creating momentum for these discussions, for creating partnerships, fostering collaboration across country lines, and start the change we need to create the ocean we want. During this meeting, we want to talk about these challenges for the Atlantic specifically, and how we can create and transform the current infrastructure of ocean observing to be inclusive and foster equity, as well as build to serve for society. Thank you again for attending this side event, and we're really looking forward to a fruitful discussion. And with no further ado, I want to pass it over to Jessica Snowden, the Deputy Director of the Global Ocean Observing and Monitoring Program at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, to moderate the keynote speaker section of this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone, our speakers and our attendees, for joining us today. I'm honored to introduce our 3 keynote speakers who will address various parts of the Atlantic Ocean Basin, from the north to the tropics and the south. I look forward to hearing their highlights of the advances made in science, as well as challenges that we face in these regions. Our first speaker today is Tosta Tanwa. Tosta is a chemical oceanographer working at Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany. Tosta, over to you.
So thank you, Jessica and Anne, for that introduction. And it's my privilege to be here with you and to kick off this presentation. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. So I would like to give some examples from the North Atlantic, how the North Atlantic community is contributing to GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System. And I'm going to do that by stating a little bit more of a general describing the framework of ocean observing, and then give 3 examples before heading off to the tropical Atlantic and the South Atlantic. So the observing system is really based on this document called Framework for Ocean Observing. Has been published about 10 years ago following a big ocean observing conference in 2009. It really describes a very simple, in principle, very simple system for ocean observing. It has a block of input, requirement setting, kind of defining the question that you would like to have an answer on. And in that process, then you define what variables, the essential ocean variables you need to measure, and define a little bit more on the accuracy, precision, latency, and spatial and temporal frequency, etc., that you need to observe these things for getting your answer that you asked in the first place. Then we move into that box of processes, and that is actually the observations that we normally think of: the gliders, the Argo flows, the research vessels, the satellites making observations, etc. But all of those are useless if you don't have that data management system that produces data or make them visible, accessible. Today we would call them FAIR, and also produce data products and information products. And that really feeds back into that requirement setting space again, where you can assess the efficiency of the observing system for that question you set out to answer in the first place. And the 4 also set out the readiness level concept, which is very commonly used in technology, where you move from a concept phase, kind of something that you think out of and test in the lab, and the pilot phase where you do some limited experiments in the ocean, towards a more mature system that can deliver that, that answer on a regular space. And a more modern or different way of looking at this is the value chain that was formulated in the Goose 2030 strategy. And same thing here, moving from input processes to outputs, but we added that impact. We really would like to have impact on society in delivery of services to the end users. And you can see here how that curved line goes from the left to the right, but there are also arrows going back from the right to the left to give that feedback and assessment process. And the global ocean observing system is really looking for producing information and delivery on climate and ocean health and operational services. And what is the path then to go from that initial state of an idea to a mature observing system? And it was formulated by a paper from Nolin et al. Talking about Goose about 10 years ago. So really developed an operational and analysis technique in the lab, in the research project. You take that out to a pilot project, could be North Atlantic or Southern Indian Ocean, whatever. You assess that and you move into a pre-operational use of the methods and data by the researchers and application groups and to the end users. And if that all works fine, you can incorporate the methods and data into the operational framework and hopefully gain sustained support for that observing system. And I think that we are doing great on point 1, probably pretty good on 2 and 3, but we really have a hard time to move from 3, that pilot, into an operational system. And I will give some examples of 3 observing systems in the North Atlantic that are on slightly different stages of this scale, and what challenges and successes we have seen there. I mean, this is just 3 examples out of many, many, many I could choose from. But I choose here one on the biology space, and this is something I think is really amazing. The Continuous Plankton Recorder Survey has a 60-year track record in deploying this kind of little device you see in the picture to the right here that is getting towed behind mostly commercial ships, but could be, ferries or research vessels on regular routes that you can see to the left here in that table. It really looks at a plankton, a zooplankton, and partly phytoplankton as well. This is, of course, one of the fundamental bases of the marine ecosystem to understand the distribution and abundance of this plankton. And the system has delivered really important findings, as you would expect from a system they've been working for 6 decades. In this particular graph here, you see 4 different copepod types that like warm or cold water, more or less, and 3 different time periods, each covering about 2 decades. And what you really see here is that as we are heating our planet, the distribution range of these copepods are moving from south towards the north for all 4 ranges here. And it's very often the case for an observing system that you design to observe one particular phenomena. It turns out to be useful for something else that you never designed in the beginning. And in this particular case, it is about plastic. And as you see on that picture here, the plankton recorders also trap plastic. And in this case, microplastic and macroplastic. And you can see, surprise, I guess, how we have much more plastic in these surveys than we had 20 years ago. And this turns out now to be the longest ever record in the ocean on plastic distribution in a relatively systematic way. But even for a system like this that has been up and running and operational for such a long time, there are issues in funding. So in 2017, there was a reduction in funding and several lines had to be cut down. This continued. I'm happy to report from conversations with the CPR people that some of these lines has been resumed, and there are some pending proposals to resume even more of those. So there is hope for stepping up and keep this important product going. To the right here, you see what I think is one of the fundamental requirements for a useful and sustainable observing system is open and free data. Today we will call them fair. I mean, you really have to have fast delivery, timely delivery of data, and open and free for all to get an impact. So my second example here is on ocean carbon uptake. As you know, the ocean takes up something like 1/4 or maybe 1/3 of all anthropogenic emissions. It's the major driver of climate. And to the left, you see 2 maps here. The top map shows the fluxes of carbon dioxide. The red means outgassing from the ocean, and blue means that the ocean takes up carbon dioxide. And you really see here North Atlantic being deep blue, being a key sink of carbon dioxide. The lower map shows the anthropogenic carbon column inventory. And again, the North Atlantic really stands out as that part in the world where most of the anthropogenic carbon is stored in the interior ocean. And the graph to the right shows, different models and observational products on how that sink has evolved in the last 6 decades. It's really interesting to see how that sink has increased with time as emissions has increased. And many research or recent research really suggests that as we getting into a decreased emissions scenario, the ocean sink will actually start to decrease. And it's really important to understand to what extent that will decrease. And this is graph I really like quite a lot, this pyramid here, because it really shows you that value chain in operation that I described before. You have in the bottom row here, different entities that can actually make these observations. That feeds into data products, in this case, SOCAT and GLODAP for surface and interior ocean data. And these data products are then used by scientists doing the mapping and assimilation and creating products that feeds into assessment, reports, and then further reporting up to entities like UNFCCC, IPCC report, and so on. And you see to the left here some networks, SOCONET and ICOS, that are operating and taking care of some of the observational elements, but also the GCOS and GOOSE process here to oversee the process. And here you see, the database from SOCAT on surface ocean carbon dioxide, 2 years for, roughly 10 years apart, each of them here. In 2000, we were kind of in the early stage of concept, I guess, to prove the system of observations. 10 years ago, we were in pilot state, and several projects, both in Europe and in North America, were able to deploy CO2 measurements. We had a pretty good coverage of the North Atlantic, and at that point could give a pretty good estimate of the annual sink of carbon dioxide in this area. Now, recently, we have lost some of these lines, and we don't have such a good coverage as we had 10 years ago. I think we are failing a little bit from going from that pilot phase to a more mature observing system, which I really think is a shame. You know, we know how to do this, we know how to deliver, but we just don't get that funding to support continuous operations of observations. The third example I want to give here is about Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. And in the North Atlantic, in the North Atlantic even, this is the OSNAP array. And you can see that here, moving from Canada up to Greenland, across over to the UK. And my colleagues here, Sabrina and Letizia, will talk about the similar arrays in different parts of the Atlantic and how they are connected. And the objectives of OSNAP is really to quantify the volume, the flux of the AMOC, the variability on different time scales, and see how that really transfers into water, overflow water and water mass on water mass requirements here. And I really want to determine the nature and degree of the subpolar, subtropical AMOC connectivity, right? So that's how this survey actually, or this observing system, really connects to the tropics and South Atlantic. It's a really multinational and multi-institutional collaboration, as is the other example that I showed you, and it really shows how we have to work together across nations and institutes to make these observations that we really need. And looking at OSNAP in particular, I got this feedback from the OSNAP people here about phases in creating this observing system. From the design phase, where you look at the user groups, the key deliverables, and you identify the phenomena and essential ocean variables that you need to observe. And then you start designing your experiment, and the OSNAP community then decided to use as much as possible of existing assets to minimize new investments. Then you get into that pre-operational phase where you actually do install the assets in the water, and you get the first data back, and you do a joint analysis of all the products. Then you move into that assessment phase where you really start assessing the products that you have created and see if they actually are fit for purpose. And ideally, you can go into an operational phase where the system is more sustainable operation. I think that the OSNAP is still now in the assessment phase, but even so, once you get into the operational phase, you always have to go back to that assessment phase as requirement change and technology develops. And in this particular case here, you can see what's called GOSNAP, where oxygen and carbon dioxide sensors and loggers has been installed on the array to deliver more from that initial design. And I thank you, and I would like to pass on to my friends in the tropical Atlantic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tosta. And again, we'll have some time for questions after all three of our keynote speakers have gone. I'm pleased to introduce our second keynote speaker, Sabrina Spike. Sabrina is a professor in ocean, atmosphere, and climate sciences at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, where she's also the Dean of Studies at the Department of Geosciences. Sabrina, you have the floor.
Okay, we'll try. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, and I'm really honored because I will be talking about the Tropical Atlantic contribution in a day where the Tropical Atlantic Observing System review has been published. And so I take this opportunity to present this huge effort that took us 3 years to evaluate, assess, and put forward some recommendation for the future development of this observing system. This work has been done together with many experts, in particular Bill Jones from Erasmus. And here I would like to thank specifically Regina Rodriguez, Moacir Haraguyo, and Bernard Bourles for specific contribution to this presentation. But the work has been done from experts from 13 all-Atlantic countries that are listed here, and some experts from elsewhere, Australia, China, Japan, in order to have also some expertise from other ocean basin. So the tropical Atlantic has a really a very key importance for the Atlantic and all Atlantic countries in the tropical Atlantic, but not only. So here is an image that is representing a marine heat waves that is affecting the earthy fluxes, but also marine ecosystem. And this was oops, sorry. This was a marine heat waves that happened in January 2020, and with some pictures here, you can find different kind of impact of this tropical ocean that have a strong influence on land. So you have droughts, you have floods, flash floods, you have also hurricanes or intense storms, and of course impact on agriculture and the well-being of people, including impact on fisheries and marine ecosystem in general. So we can summarize that this societal relevance of this basin is for operational service, for forecast, for the ocean health and fisheries. Of course, it is undergoing to climate variability and change, research, and it is important to also better understand the system, so the research and discovery. The tropical Atlantic is not the most large basin in the tropical ocean, but is a very complex system. It's affected by some of the most complex mode of variability. And it has, of course, a particular dynamics because it connected the world ocean to the North Atlantic through the AMOC, but it's also connected, or it is influencing the basin outside its domain, so the North Atlantic and the other tropical domains. So its understanding is really complex, and this is also why it is complex to in forecasting. It is difficult. The forecast, seasonal forecast, for example, or even hurricanes have some fail sometimes because of this complexity. So the tropical Atlantic observing system today that is in place is an ensemble of different networks. We have moorings, we have drifters, we have biogeochemical sensors on ships and also on moorings. We have gliders, we have Argo floats. And this ensemble is the tropical Atlantic observing system, but actually it is made of different projects and network. We can refer to the ocean in general observing system as an ensemble of research projects that try to have funding, repeat cruises, maintain moorings, but this is done essentially on research funding. So it is a challenge to have such a system sustain. However, so the different stories that I can tell about the different pieces of this tropical Atlantic contribution to the observing system are various. So there is the Pirata array that I will take as an example in a few minutes. We have Move and Sacus mooring arrays that are in the north and south of Pirata, where the researchers are trying to understand the AMOC and its variability and connection between the two basins, the southern and northern basin of the Atlantic. We have Surface Drifter. We have the Argo floats array with the density, where is red, the density is not good in terms of deployments and data availability. And we have many vessel underway observations in the Atlantic that are also important because they are used for example, for weather forecast. So I take the prediction research moored array in the tropics, Pirata, as an example, because this was an agreement between 3 countries that is renewed regularly since almost 25 years. And they started with 10 Atlas boys trying to start a system that is compared to what have been developing at the time for the Togatau in the Pacific. And year by year, they continue to yearly serve these moorings to increase the number of moorings, to increase the variables that have been measured. And so we are in the 4th phase where a new MOU has been is in signature. And if you take a look on the number of data that are downloaded, so in blue is FTP and red is web, so you can see the incredible impact of this data, not only for the research, but really for the applications. And these are really data that are matters, for example, for weather forecast or extreme events like hurricanes prediction. So we have an in situ component, but we have also the satellite component that is pretty large and is measuring atmospheric ocean, surface ocean variables and also fluxes between the two. And these are also really key for the impact of the data together with the in situ system. The in situ is important because, of course, satellite just measure the surface of the ocean. So we have been implementing a review report the question is, so we need a tropical Atlantic observing system that need to be sustained and also fit for purpose. So this tropical Atlantic is filled by observation funded by research project and global observing networks. So we needed to find a way to really sustain and optimize this system. And this was the aim, the major aim of the review process. So we apply the framework of the ocean observing to evaluate the present observing system and provide recommendation to develop this sustain a fit for purpose system built on the goose observing value chain. And we identify the operational drivers for TAOs that are, of course, the research, the climate impacts, the ocean carbon system, but also biogeochemical process and ecosystem dynamics and fisheries. And so the key recommendation through the essential ocean variables and the essential climate variables allows to look at the system in integrated ways. So the recommendation, of course, are classic in improving the numbers of moorings for different reasons. One is also the hurricane season forecast and better hurricane predictions, but also to co-develop the observing system through different research projects and global networks. For example, to co-develop a TAO strategy together with Argo 2025. So we also recommended the development and use of new technology to improve the efficiency of the system and improve the cost and the robustness. We also provided a recommendation on the data flow, the information products, on the governance, how to resource and structure the tropical Atlantic observing system, because it's in nations that come together and need to agree in what is sustained, who pays for what. And also for periodic TAOs review, that is an important process because the requirements evolve, the technology evolves, so also the TAOs need to evolve accordingly. And of course, we also pushed for including more stakeholders. We need to go, the system need to go through to the coast to include the Caribbean, and also to include other requirements such as cultural and societal dimensions. So also, TAOs need to improve the knowledge. The science is not completely understood, and so that needs to allow new process studies. One has been happening really recently in the just before the pandemic in the tropical Atlantic that will provide really is an international framework that will provide important knowledge to better parameterize process, small-scale process in the atmosphere, in the ocean, and at the interface into models. So the final statement I can say is that the tropical Atlantic is a key observing system that need to be consolidated, expanded, and sustained. It will probably be a backbone for the Atlantic observing system as a whole. Is a potential exemplar also within the United Nations Decade for Ocean Sciences, and in particular for the GOOSE program, Ocean Observing Co-Design, Coast Predict, and Observing Together. So I think the Tropical Atlantic Observing System has really a huge impact, need to be sustained, and I think this is the right moment to come together and make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. This brings us to our third keynote speaker for today, after which I look forward to questions from you all for our panel. Our final keynote speaker is Leticia Cotrim de Cunha. Leticia is the Assistant Professor of Oceanography at Rio de Janeiro State University in Brazil and co-leads the Brazilian Ocean Acidification Research Network. Leticia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, and Christine as well. Okay, so let's start the presentation. I'm really keen on talking about closing the loop on the Atlantic. I'm going to present the South Atlantic observation efforts, and I mean I prepared this with the collaboration of part of the Pirata, although they are tropical, but I mean there's the interface between the tropical and the South Atlantic, the Brazilian acidification team, the Samba team from the South Atlantic line from USP, Rodrigo Kerr, and the High Latitudes Oceanography Group, and the Chemical Oceanography Laboratory, and the Marine Ecology Laboratory at my university as well. And so why are we here? So the question is, why should we, I mean, we've seen we should observe the whole Atlantic Ocean, but I'm going to focus on the south, and I'm going to show some of the ocean observing efforts. And I apologize if your project is not here, but I mean, I had only 10 minutes. I'm going to show the main challenges and what should they do. Well, it has been presented before. I mean, all the aspects, the important aspects is the highway, the South Atlantic as well for the AMOC. I mean, the tropical area of the Atlantic receives almost 1/4 of the global water river discharge, which is a lot of fresh water. And if you go further down to the South Atlantic gyre, we have very important features. Where we have the southern branch of the AMOC, but you also have the Agulhas leakage, and which transfers a lot of heat and salt from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic. We have very important upwelling areas in the South Atlantic, and the extension, the South Atlantic touches also the Southern Ocean. So it's very important in many aspects. And starting with showing you some of the efforts, we have in 2017, we had the first basin-wide South Atlantic Ocean meridional overturning circulation, all from Africa to Brazil. And as a result, I mean, there was a paper published in the beginning of this year showing that there is a transfer of heat, and also from the array here on 34 degrees south, there's a net transfer of heat. There's a net transfer of water as well, and it's important that we understand going on along the South Atlantic basin, so that we can close the budget on what's really happening and what's happening on the AMOC itself, because any variability, I mean, on the north, on the tropics, but also on the south, is a very important changes in the AMOC is important, is a driver for the variability of the whole AMOC, and with the implications for climate that we have. And recently as well, on the western side of the Samba array, where there are moorings and pies instruments that are moored at the bottom here of Uruguay. From long-term observations, there's the researchers found a trend in warming in the southwestern Atlantic, and this is also very very important, because changes in the heat content are going to affect not only circulation, but also affect the biology, and it may also affect fisheries, and it has like a cascading effect, and for all of us. And another important aspect, now more on the biogeochemistry side of the Patagonian shelf, we saw that the North Atlantic is key for the ocean carbon sink. But we also have an important and non-negligible sink on the South Atlantic, and the fact is that there is already a clear sign for anthropogenic CO2 uptake off the Patagonian shelf, and the central waters are acidifying faster than the other water masses, and the Antarctic intermediate water is under risk of undersaturation if a trend is confirmed. This is a paper from 2019. And the key point of acidification in this area here is an important area for fisheries. How is the traffic chain, the marine traffic chain, is being affected by these changes in ocean biogeochemistry? And another aspect is also on the plankton ecology, which is there's a big gap in observations if you look on the modeling using plankton functional groups. And last year there was a paper published and looking on how is the plankton ecology on inside agulhas rings, agulhas eddies, anticyclonic eddies. And we found that observing 3 different edges of 3 different ages, the functionality, so the mixotrophy and adapted to oligotrophy and etc., they were very similar within the edges, despite the different species composition, but the plankton functionality was the same within these 3 edges. And this is also very interesting. This is also very interesting to understand again how does it reflect in the rest of the trophic chain, and how does it affect the biological carbon pump and in many other aspects. And I was this morning, I slightly changed this slide from yesterday to today after listening to the CoastNet side event this morning here in All-Atlantic. And coastal sites are also highly relevant. And they're also very highly relevant in the South Atlantic, because most of the people live by the coast. And we have many different types of coastal ecosystems. And I'm giving you the example here on your right-hand side from Brazil. We do have coral reefs, rhodolite beds, which are calcareous algae, very specific type of algae living in the bottom. There are mangroves all over the places, but there are also seagrasses and salt marshes. And this goes further down, because then we have all the subtropical and subpolar ecosystems along the Argentinian coast, for instance. And today we saw the different experiences and the different levels of readiness of the existing observatories. And this makes me think of one of Tosta's first slide on the level of matureness we need for having a whole Atlantic system. And so the main challenges, from today, and from my former experience, capacity, the same capacity for observations, that's to say, using the best practices, having resources flowing through the observing efforts, capacity building, and the good practices. But we also need some regional adaptation, because the science question and the data needs can be different, because we are so, the coasts are so heterogeneous, and the South Atlantic is also different from the North Atlantic. And the main actors and stakeholders for this type of data in the South Atlantic, it doesn't change much. And I took this a concept from Atlantis, and some of the ideas that came out on the preparing workshop for the Ocean Decade for the South Atlantic, that main actors and stakeholders would be, for instance, port authorities, and new technologies are needed, autonomous measurement systems, new sources of funding like the World Bank Pro Blue, but also other foundations also as investors. But this doesn't take the responsibility of the states also to foster observations. And the question we have to make is how much a sustainable use of and then the South, but also the whole Atlantic, how much it would help reducing the present costs. And this we have to take in mind. And one value chain example is with this idea from the Ocean Decade, but also from this recent published idea of that we need, there's this warming trend in the southwestern Atlantic. So, and if we detect this and we can, if we have good models, we can run forecasting, we can adapt the needs we have for regional for our regional purposes. Synthesis, from observation, synthesis reports, and at different levels for global issues, but also for local, and to foster public policies for countries is also very important. And this brings to adapted regional solutions. And again, this is the different flavors of what we have in observations here in the South Atlantic, plus the coastal efforts. And we are all within this, how do you say, we have this framework of having now the Galway Statement, Belaine Statement, the 2030 Agenda, the UN Decade, and the All-Atlantic Initiative, with all the, to engage people together for this. And to finish, we have to have in mind that, the science, good science matters for everybody. And this is a recent paper from my colleague, Regina Rodrigues. And she used the word climate sciences, but we can change it and substitute it for oceanographers. It comes from what do we need, and we have to work for our societies, and work for our societies from north to south. And with that, I'll leave you, and thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Leticia, and to all of our keynote presenters. I'm struck as often when watching these sorts of presentations, and you all did a wonderful job of sharing success stories and challenges from different parts of the Atlantic. Looking at the pictures of all of the dots and lines on maps, it's both wonderful to see how many observations are being made, that they're being used, but it's also such a good reminder that we're still under observing in many areas, and that there's disparity across the basin on how these things are done and being resourced. I certainly heard common trends such as increased data access and use, which is always encouraging to hear. Also common challenges such as funding, right? That comes up over and over again, how to sustain the funding. So thank you all for laying that out. And I'm gonna just quickly click down here to see if there are any questions from the group before I start asking my own. Okay, that's Ann. So a first question, and this one is for Sabrina, though certainly this came up in multiple, if not all of your presentations, with respect to including more stakeholders. So how do you think you can effectively include various stakeholders in these conversations and ensure the topics are of relevance to all the stakeholders in the community?
Just because it has happened, I have participated to the Caribbean inaugural discussion of the ocean decade, and actually the stakeholders are very present in the ocean decade. They have regional groups, and I think also the ocean has been gaining visibility in terms of understanding of its importance. So I think it is much easier than a few years ago to really sit, and probably within the ocean decade as a impulsion to sit with a different set of stakeholders, with different nations and set of stakeholders, and then it will spread afterwards wider and wider.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is certainly an opportunity. We just need to find the ways to make best use of it. Another question I have, it's a little bit self-serving and personal interest, but I heard again and again come up the comment about connecting to the coasts. And so you look at the background that's behind most of you who are able to change your Zoom backgrounds. There's the Atlantic basin. How do we, or I'm going to make the assumption that we're not doing a good enough job yet. How do we make these connections to the coasts and to coastal communities, both through answering shared observing science questions and also perhaps capacity building and sharing of best practices? How do we do that better? And that could be for any of you. So Sabrina or
I can start maybe for the tropical Atlantic. So we invited in this review process many of these countries that are not really so much interested in the open ocean because they are looking more to information near the coast. And the interest was of course huge. Many of these countries do not have really access to many capacity in observing. But I think again with Coast Predict, with some other programs in the ocean decade, there is an opportunity to really start to build exemplars. And for the tropical Atlantic, I think it is pretty mature, thanks probably to this Taos review report. But in order to start to make this happening, and of course there are specific sites that perhaps will really be an examples, but I think also in the North and South Atlantic there are things going on.
So Tosta?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think we are used to have these global maps like we see behind me here with dots in the middle of the ocean. That doesn't mean that there is not a lot of observations being made close to the coast. It's just made by a slightly different community. And I think that connection between the users and the stakeholders, really everybody's society is not that clear. And also there is not maybe in all instances a good sharing of data and information between nations. And Sabrina mentioned the two decadal programs that GOES is supporting. Coast Predict is really looking into integrating observations and forecasts into the coast. And the coast is defined very widely, actually up on the beach and inland. The coastal zone is not just the water side, it's actually inside and the estuaries. And the other one is the Observing Together, that is really designed to have that engagement with the stakeholders and the communities. So that relates to your first question. I think we have a long way to go to really connect to all the stakeholders. And that's difficult because there are so many of them, right? So that requires a very dedicated effort to connect. Thank you.
Yeah, and to finish, just bringing some of the information I got this morning from exactly from this network of coastal observatories, and as I said, there were 10 initiatives all over from the tropical Atlantic to the South Atlantic, and I guess it is still how to say a challenge. And to harmonize the data and to make the data available using the FAIR principle that the colleagues talked earlier today. But yes, also people are getting more and more aware the need they have for the ocean. And this, as Sabrina said, is, I guess, I mean, hopefully it's going to come along the decade. The faster, the better it's going to be. And yeah, and having more people engaged, it's, I guess we're going to have, it's going to be easier to how to say, to bridge this gap from the coast to the open ocean observations. The ranges may be different and everything, but I guess we are on the way. It's a good way to do it.
Thank you all. We have a couple of questions here in the Q&A box, and one of them is directly related to the UN decade. So the question is, well, first a comment. This person read a tweet pointing out that the kickoff of the Ocean Decade in Germany didn't make it into the news. So when talking about sustainable and stakeholders, it comes down to money. There's an increased need for public awareness. So what are your ideas on how we can use the decade to be more than a phrase? How do we increase public awareness of this and thereby increase support for the UN decade? Who would like to take that one? I'll pick on someone.
Yeah, I can start saying, and then thanks, Toby, for your question. And as you said, I mean, it didn't even make it into the news. Yeah, I mean, it didn't make it into the news here in Brazil either. Yeah, and the one thing that we repeatedly listen when we discussing integrating the data and making the observation sustainable. Yes, it comes to money. It's difficult to use. I mean, people have to feel that they need, but they don't know they need, and it's complicated. And one impression I have is from some governments that say, well, the private initiative should also pay for it, but it's I'm not. So then I don't have to invest in science. I mean, as I said, the nations, they need to invest as well, because they're as much users of the data products as any navigation company or oil exploiting company and things like this. So, but this communication is more complicated for, I mean, I'm still also a bit nerd and I don't know how to bridge very well this, but this is a gap has to be bridged. I don't know if I helped answering your question.
May I just add something? So I think things are changing. In France, we have been having since 1 year a minister for the sea that we didn't have before, and WMO is getting interested into the ocean. It's not. I mean, it's. I think. The ocean decade is starting, and of course the outer world doesn't know really very much about the ocean, but what is important that in 3 years from now they will know something. So we need to build it, and we have a lot of synergies. There is a lot of energy from the young generation, from the older generations, and also there is a lot of interest from different groups in nations, I mean governmental groups. So this is promising.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm afraid we need to move on. I believe, as Anne noted at the beginning, if questions have been posed, we will capture those and intend to get answers back, so you're not being forgotten. Final question, and I'm reading this as they came in. Ronald Souza, is there a possibility of setting up operational observing programs on hotspot regions in the South Atlantic, such as the Agulhas leakage and the Brazil-Malvinas confluence? And I suppose that would be for you, Leticia. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ronald, for your question. Thank you. Well, I guess it is feasible. I mean, for instance, on if you remember the slide I showed, I mean, on the Samba line, I mean, we have instruments on the eastern basin, but also on the western basin, and I guess all the SAMA community, I mean, they could start. I don't know how the efforts are being done. I mean, for modeling, for sure, for the observations and for the data processing and on the process base, meaning but I guess things could be also adapted to operational oceanography in that area. I mean, it's important, navigation is as important on the eastern as on the western basin in the Atlantic. Then it is feasible. I don't know, again, it's again also a question of being how mature are the communities, and how do they communicate with the operational oceanography groups, which I don't think they are the same people doing both.
If I may add something, but Juliet later can add. So on the Samba line, I think it is a very nice example of international collaborations that is also coupling what is happening near the coast or in the coast, for example, in the Benguela upwelling system, to the larger ocean dynamics. And of course, it has been hard to build something that is far from rich countries and more difficult than North Atlantic. But we started in 2004 with this SAMOC project, and now we have more than 10 years of time series. So it's interesting. So I think we need to stop. And
maybe may I just say a few words? I think it's a good question, and we really are designing the observing system that we have more and more intense observations in hotspots. And this is clear. I mean, we have, a high density of Argo floats. We try to have it at least in the tropical ocean, because we know that's important and so on. So that's already in the design. And I think what's more interesting, and what's interesting additionally, is that dynamic observing system where you can, move resources to things that are happening. For instance, a tropical storm towards the US, you can add, drop floats and gliders in front of that to determine the mixed layer depth and better forecast on intensity and track forecast of that storm. So these are things that is actually happening. Hotspots, but also hotspots that are developing and changing in real time to have a dynamic, agile, and responsive observing system. Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for the questions and engaging in this part of our presentation today. So I'm going to hand it back over to Anne, who will kick off the panel part of our discussion.
Thank you so much. I also just want to second everything that Jess said. Thank you so much for the very inspiring and knowledgeable presentations. If I could ask all the panelists and speakers to now turn their cameras on. We will now transition to the panel discussion and hear from a broad range of expertise on their perspectives on how we can come together and form a synergistic observing system and continue the discussion we had before, leveraging existing efforts and co-designing efforts in the future to foster this inclusivity and equity that I mentioned before. And at this point, I would like to invite the panelists to provide a short opening remarks. But first, I will quickly introduce who is joining us on the panel. So unfortunately, Maria Paz won't be able to attend today due to personal reasons, but she's a physical oceanographer at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council and Hydrographic Service in Argentina. So all the best to her. We have Pierre-Yves Letron, who is a scientific director at Mercator Ocean International and research director at Ephemer. We have Christian Burmeister, who is an early career ocean professional and a postdoctoral research associate in the physical oceanography department at the Scottish Association for Marine Science. Juliet Hermes is a manager at the Marine Offshore Node of the South African Environmental Observing Network. We have Anya White, who is the scientific director and CEO of the Ocean Frontiers Institute and associate vice president researcher of Dalhousie University. We have Andre Polyak, who used to coordinate the Brazilian ocean and Antarctic research endeavors at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Zdenka Willis, who's the president of the Marine Technology Society. And last but not least, Pierre Fitek, who works as a senior business development manager at Ocean Science at Kongsberg Maritime. Don't know why that was so hard. So I'm going to hand it over to the panelists, and if we can start with Pierre-Yves, that would be fantastic.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here and listening the very nice introduction and discussing all these issues related to the development of the Atlantic observing system. So maybe just a few words on my side, just to maybe start the few issues for the panel discussion. I think, and this was presented by the different speakers, but it's very important to have a good understanding of the full value chain that goes from the observation to the users. In this value chain, I mean, the role of modeling data assimilation is quite important, because this is where you start to integrate in different networks, satellite observation, and so on. So it's a very important element to be discussed, and also to develop international cooperation on this issue. And then maybe taking the perspective of what we have been doing in Europe over the past couple of years with the Copernicus Marine Service, where we now have an operational service in Europe that provides information on the state of the ocean. It provides forecasts and provides products and so on. I think it's quite important to have operational services. And operational is a broad sense. It doesn't need to be real time, but this has to be systematic and so on. This really allows you to interact regularly with users. And it's very important to start working with the users very soon in the process. I mean, not on this activity on user engagement, user interaction is key. This has to be organized in different ways. There are also all the training aspects that are quite important. I guess we will come back on this issue during the panel, but this was my short intro.
Thank you so much, Pierre. I'm handing it over to Christine.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for having me today. So I am a postdoc at the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban, and I am working on the EU-funded project All-Atlantic. I am a seagoing oceanographer and help to collect long-term observations in the tropical and North Atlantic. And at the very beginning of my career, when I started my PhD, I struggled to see how the ocean observation that I collected and the science that I'm doing could help to tackle the big challenges of our society. I struggled because ocean observation go through a long and complex system before they finally arrive as informational services for the end user. And it took me some time to truly see and understand the value chain of ocean observation. It took me even longer to understand that I am actually an end user. For example, I love scuba diving, and I'm using weather and current prediction apps daily to plan my dives at the weekends. Just last weekend, I was diving in the St. Apps and Weymouth Voluntary Marine Reserve. This is the first marine reserve to be established in the UK. And the villages, St. Apps and Weymouth, both owe their existence to fishing industry. And here local fishermen, divers and scientists work together to protect this valuable marine environment. And today the area is well known for its productive and thriving waters. And for me, this is an excellent example what we can gain when scientists, industry, governments and citizens work closely together. And I would love to see that across the entire Atlantic. And this is grounded of an efficient, a fair and sustained observing system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. I can definitely relate to that as I'm a diver myself. And I keep telling my friends, if you use your weather app every day, that's the ocean observing realm and the modelers and the forecasters. So I'm trying to communicate that message as well. Next, I would like to ask Juliet to give her opening remarks.
Thanks. And thanks, Kristen. As a surfer, I agree with you. I'm also always using those apps. So coming from Africa, I'm going to start with an African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. So by this, we mean an entire community of people must interact with children for them to experience and grow in a safe and healthy environment. And in the same vein, it's going to take the Atlantic community as a whole and the diversity within it to raise a sustainable ocean observing system. The sharing of capacity, technology, best practices, infrastructure, and especially data, as we've heard, is essential. But we need to draw from the successes of things like Atlantos and others towards building an interoperable system. But we also need to acknowledge that requirements vary depending on mission, ocean environment, and capabilities. In the same way, we need to acknowledge and embrace cultural and institutional differences. Going to sea on an African vessel may well and is very different to the experience on an American one. Effective communication and collaborations between scientists from different parts of the world shouldn't be something for the distant future. And observing systems need to be co-generated with all countries involved, as we keep hearing and we'll hopefully hear into the future. However, in 2021, we really shouldn't still be experiencing parachute science. Communication to communities and increasing their literacy of the benefit of observations to their daily life is essential. Sustained observing requires a coordinated, collaborative, and culturally appropriate process, incorporating Indigenous knowledge with long-term resourcing that meets local, national, and regional needs. But there remains a disconnect between international legal and policy framework and the reality of global ocean science collaboration. And given the influence this will have on economic stability for the impacted countries, it's imperative that long-term resourcing be a combination of international and local funding. And finally, we need to seriously engage more disciplines such as biologists, as well as industry and modelers, as we've heard, and end users in an observing system that is fit for purpose and that delivers value to society. It requires us to listen to and to deliver the right information into the hands that understand how to use it. And we need to ensure that we include and mentor the new diverse generation of transformed and informed ocean scientists. And the All-Atlantic Ocean Youth Ambassadors, as well as the Ocean Decade Early Career Group, are a really, really great example of what can be achieved. And I'm looking forward to seeing great things happen with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. I now want to hand it over to Anya.
Thanks, Anne-Christine, and thanks to all my colleagues today, particularly the keynote speakers. I found those talks very inspiring, and a number of the issues that you raised, I think, are super important. And for all the observation that we're doing across the Atlantic basin, as Tosta and Sabrina outlined, how to use the framework for ocean observation to really make the Atlantic work. And I think deliverables continue to be the key. Somehow we need to move away, and I think a number of you have mentioned this, we need to move away from ocean observations as just a conglomeration of research projects. And to do that, I think we need to ask ourselves the question much more clearly, to what end? To what end are we observing? What are we trying to deliver? What are we trying to actually gain from these expensive and challenging observations? So my suggestion is that we need to become a bit more targeted and more mission-based to deliver information to policymakers and other stakeholders. And Letitia mentioned we really needed to work for our societies, but how do we define that? I think there's these three key areas that Tosta mentioned: ocean heat, carbon, and biodiversity. Those are places where right now our policymakers need clear information to support their international engagement. And I'll just give you one example in the ocean carbon space. The Ocean Frontier Institute, which I lead, is actively pursuing the establishment of a North Atlantic Carbon Observatory. And we have a strong desire to work with the G7 and other international partners to build a fully functional observatory that will be able to provide real-time data to our policymakers. And it's really the capacity to measure and monitor the carbon absorption in the North Atlantic, which is sort of emerging as an essential tool for both global governments and UN bodies as they establish their net zero targets. The net zero targets will not be achievable unless we understand the baseline of ocean carbon absorption. And after the G7 Environment Ministers meeting, Canada announced that it will work with its G7 partners to convene a meeting of leading scientific and technical experts to discuss scaling up knowledge and monitoring of the North Atlantic biogeochemical carbon pump, a process that is critical to the ocean's ability to absorb carbon. And so that's a direct quote from the Canadian announcement. So what we can see is that we're starting to get some traction at the national and potentially now international level to work for targeted mission-based observation that will really lift all ships literally as we go forward. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Anya. I'm handing it over to Andre, but I just wanted to second that you answered part of my questions I have for later. So thank you for bringing that up with being more mission-based and targeted and making sure that we are actually working towards a well-defined goal. So Andre, over to you.
Thank you, Anne-Christine, and thank you very much to the organizers for having me in this event. And I kind of feel empty now after Juliet just came with everything at once, you know. It was brilliant the way that she brought it up. And I think that's just because we live similar realities down in the South, South Africa, Brazil. We have limited research capacity. So when the Global North is actually talking about how to interoperabilize ocean observing systems, we are actually thinking about what kind of sensors are we able to develop nationally. How can we maintain our equipment and instruments, and how we're going to be securing ship time for deployment of equipment. So those kind of questions are very important. And one very interesting thing that I heard from Julia today is that we are in this century still dealing with parachute science. And I challenge her and all here that we should stop using names such as parachute and helicopter science. It is science colonialism. We must name it as it is. So it's enough time that we work only for our own benefits. If we just deploy equipments from multi-million research projects in field work down in the South without leaving there enough capacity and equipment for the work to continue on. And we should change it, not because we are good and we are assistants of the Global South, but because we need to understand the whole basin. And without that kind of knowledge, without the involvement of the local actors, that will be simply impossible. So just yesterday, I was participating in this research infrastructure conference in Canada, well, in Zoom, as my whole life seems to be. But it was interesting because I was participating in the session exactly on how do you develop KPIs, the indicators of the social impact of research infrastructure. And you know what? Nobody was talking about the ocean. And the ocean is an amazing place to do that, especially with the ocean observing systems, because they are multinational and they are cooperative by nature. And they are cross, transdisciplinary. And the one thing that I learned yesterday that was really amazing is that all the indicators that they have that were quantitative were not enough. They all needed to have qualitative indicators. So storytelling on how people were actually affected by their telescopes, by their satellites, by their big accelerators and synchrotron lights facilities. So why don't we think about it? We need to foster more social sciences together with us. That's the key for that. So my last message to all, let's all look into ocean science diplomacy. It is the future for us, especially for the ocean observing systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre. I'm handing it over now to Zdenka for her opening remarks.
Right, Anya, thank you. And it's certainly my privilege to be with this very august panel. So let me begin very briefly. The Marine Technology Society is a professional society. It was established in 1963. And it was established with the premise of making contributions of fostering progress in marine sciences and technologies for the benefit of humankind, and now importantly for the sustainability of our ocean and our planet. It is a global organization with members in 20 countries, and our members are individuals, they are corporate, they are institutions from private sector, public sector, and academia. So one of the reasons that I'm on here is to talk about, where does the role of industry come into this? And I'm going to start with a US example and then broaden it a bit. But we have found that new observational technologies and analytics are coming from a broad array of entities. And that means it's a new way of doing business. And in particular, disruptive technologies and innovations in the ocean observing are coming from the private sector. Within the United States, there's a group called the United States Group on Earth Observations that is affiliated and supports an interagency national look at Earth observations, and also contributes to the global Earth on observations. And every 3 years, that group puts out a national plan. So in 2019, there was the National Plan for Civil Earth Observations. And because of this recognition of the increasing role of the private sector in Earth observations, one of the things that plan did was actually define the Earth observations enterprise. And that Earth observations enterprise includes the public sector. It includes the nonprofit sector. It includes the profit sector, and it includes academia. And by defining this, it's actually had the United States start to focus on that engagement and the dialogues with the private sector. So when you look at it from an enterprise perspective, what does that give us? Certainly strong coordination across a multi-sector enterprise will advance observational capabilities. It's going to improve our ability to bolster infrastructure resilience. We can accelerate and embrace innovation in data collection, analysis, visualization, and improve our Earth system prediction capabilities by leveraging the power of Earth observations and fostering strong research environments, and fostering a thriving Earth observation economy that supports our missions, academia, and the private sector. But there are challenges, certainly, with moving in this direction. There are both technical challenges and there are cultural challenges. And to name a few, where's the market maturity? Data sharing licensing frameworks, procurement models. What are the legal discussions we need to have? What about calibration, validation? And so what that points to is not only do we need to think about the ocean enterprise from the interdisciplinary that I heard here today from our biologists and our chemists and our physical oceanographers. We always talk about that multi-sectoral from the academic, the private, and the public sector. But we also have to think about that there are other types of disciplines that we need to include. You know, we need to have the lawyers, the law community. That's where our discussions are being focused on with regard to data sharing and data licensing. What about the financiers? They need to be there at the onset of these discussions. And picking up on the thread of how do you make the ocean observations impactful and understood is in that storytelling and relating it to everyday life. I often give presentations where I start with the question of who woke up this morning with the idea that ocean observing is going to impact your life every day. And most of you know, I was in the United States Navy, and if I have a naval officer in there, I might get a hand raised. But for the average citizen, I don't get that hand raised until I say, are you holding a cell phone? Of course, most people are. And I explain that we need shipping to have cell phones. And without ocean observing, we can't get a ship in and out of port. So making that connection is really important. Making the connection to a very wide ocean observing enterprise, I think, is where we need to start to have those discussions. And I look forward to talking about that through the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna hand it over to Per. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks all the other speakers. What a great event. A real pleasure being here and hearing all those nice comments. And it's very difficult now to weave in there because so many interesting leads have already been laid here on the table to connect to. But let me provide, or let me have a short attempt here. I'll put it out quite frankly, and I'd say that science and industry should work more together to raise more awareness and mutually increase the value of the ocean and its observing to trigger a spiral of positive effects. And in order to do so, we have to understand and acknowledge that the timing to think in this direction is just fine. Why? Because we have a strongly increased societal awareness for the environment as well as for the ocean, as we also see by the Fridays for Future movement as well as the decade as such. Secondly, we see consolidation and harmonization, as well as improved structuring and organization within academia and science. And one example for this is the event that we have here. Another example is framework of ocean observing, the whole goose environment. The fact that we sit here and have this discussion is pointing exactly in this direction, and that's something that needs to be highlighted in a positive meaning. And I understand that what was suggested by Anya in terms of the more mission-based approach also goes a little bit in this direction. And then thirdly, there are changes in a positive meaning on the industrial side. The industry, provides more and more comprehensive solutions. But we have to understand that the private sector is diverse if it comes to ocean observing. Firstly, we have mainly data acquisition enablement companies that provide technology, sensors, solutions, and now more and more data services to even allow for the full value chain of collecting data, analyzing it, sharing it, etc. And then we've got this sector of the new blue economy, which starts to analyze that data and solely focuses on the generation of information products. And so if we understand that these enablers for data acquisition, they are contributors to ocean observing, right? They help to increase the robustness. They help to increase the efficiency of the collection. So they are in the same boat as the scientific operators of such a network. And then we've got the customer and user side, the sectors that need the data in order to allow for their business models to dwell. So this is another sector. So we have to differentiate in this respect. So if we have these parties joining and working closer together, we can achieve more value in the field. With more value in the field, we reach a more mature market, which leads to more industrial involvement, more industrialized and specialized equipment, improving the efficiency, robustness, etc. And then it goes on with more data, more information products. And this in return, again, raises the value of ocean observing. And again, the decade is just the perfect place to get all of this started. And there are several examples of how industry and science could come together more closely, but I think I might keep them for later in this discussion.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any immediate reactions? If not, I will turn it over to the Q&A box. If anyone has questions, please drop them in the Q&A box, comments, and I will make sure to read them out. But does anyone of the panelists have any immediate reactions? That was a lot said, a lot of content.
Well, maybe just to add one remark on the fact that over the past 10 years, we have made collectively huge progress in the way we can monitor, forecast the Atlantic Ocean, thanks also to a lot of cooperation. So I think this is a strong asset for future activities. Of course, a lot still need to be done on all aspects of the value chain, but it's very important that we should not focus only on the observation, which is, of course, the most important element, but really to take into account all the other elements of the value chain. On one aspect that was not discussed so much is a link with policies. It's very important that we are able collectively to produce assessment indicators that are relevant for policymakers. And this is where we can value the observing system and provide integrated assessment.
Thank you so much, Preet. I want to read out a quick question that came in during the opening remarks. That was asking, how do we convince governments in the North that long-sustained science collaborations are valuable and important? And Tosta already answered part of it, but I wanted to make sure he has the floor to answer it, or if any other panelists want to take a stab at that question, you're welcome to.
Well, I can start again if you want, but it's a maybe I was involved the last month on a series of workshops organized for the BGCRO array. I mean, and this was there was a major investment by the US. I mean, for 500 floats and a similar investment in several countries. But this is related to also to all the work which was done to convince government that the value of this array. So not only for research, of course, research is a key player, but not only, because we discussed in a series of workshops the impact of the array for carbon uptake estimation, fisheries, forecasting, and so on. That's one example. I think it's, but we need very convincing element. I mean, on this. I mean, on to really have all the community behind on showing how we go from the observation down to the practical problem, practical questions.
Yeah, I would follow on from those comments from Pierre. I think that the critical step is actually reaching policymakers directly and with straightforward, really simple, accurate, direct examples of what's at stake, that their own policies may fail if these observations are not made. And I think that's a lot more work than it sounds. Having sort of recently launched in this kind of crusade myself, what I'm finding is that the conversations have to be very targeted. It takes a lot of push to get the attention of a minister or of a policymaker, and then the story has to be absolutely crisp so that you can get in there and make the impact. And once you do that, it can really get traction. So I think we have the capacity to do this. It's just that it's an extra step that most scientists don't have time for, and so we need to nominate those who are going to kind of sacrifice and go in for the team and do that work, and then bring it back out to the scientific community and say, okay, a rising tide lifts all boats. Let's get something done as a community. Let's collaborate internationally to make this happen. But I think we're missing key conversations with our policymakers, and when those occur, we get movement. So it's about mapping where those need to occur. It's a kind of a grinding process, but it can work.
So I'll follow on, Anya, to those comments. I fully agree, and I think the messages are confused out there. The community, our community, wants to talk in individual programs and not with a collective voice. A. B. Not only do you have to tie it to the impact of the system to everyday life, there's got to be that economic impact about jobs, and finally its persistence. It is not a singular event. It requires a very focused, as Anya was saying, and methodical and consistent year in and year out to be able to get to this level of the sustained funding that we need. But I saw this when I was the director at IUS, and I see it now. The messages are very specific to individual programs. The more that we collectively can get behind the larger efforts, the better that the entire community will be. And that is difficult. It's not without its challenges, but I believe that's an important step. Thank you.
Sabrina, you had your hand up.
Yes, I think it requires a little bit of time. So we cannot make it happen in 1 second. It is a learning curve. I know that when I started to do oceanography, the data was owned by one person, the PI, and was not exchanged even through the lab or the institution. So we have changed some years now, and even the efforts to produce an evaluation through essential ocean variables is a learning curve for PIs of projects that are running their project, and they think about one phenomenon or two. So I think the ocean decade again give us the opportunity to really make this learning curve happening faster than that could happen without the ocean decade. So we have programs that will help encourage this to happen. So I encourage really very much to use this occasion. So we have 10 years to really change the world.
Per, go ahead.
I think Juliet, she had her hand raised for quite a while. Do you want to go first?
Sorry.
Thanks. So I just wanted to look back at that question, which talks about how do we convince governments in the North that long sustained science collaborations are valuable and important. And I want to ask, why aren't we convincing governments in the South the same? For ocean observations to be sustainable, as I said, it's going to take local, regional, and international funding. So we really need to broaden our scope and start thinking more about governments in the South. I mean, in Africa in particular, you know, there's a huge buy-in at the moment in terms of the blue economy and ocean accounting. And there's a great understanding that with so much of the population going to be impacted by what goes on in the ocean, that we need to better understand this. And so, you know, if we look at countries' GDPs, we should be really looking at countries' ocean health as well, ocean health, or the SST of the ocean around the country or something. So I think as much as we need to be looking at policymakers in the North, it's global.
The comment I wanted to make was in the direction of whether we truly have to approach the policymakers right away, or whether it should not also be one strategy to get industry more involved, get the private sector more involved, get society more involved. By doing so, get society through the ocean literacy more involved, etc., etc. And then quite naturally, policy has to pick this up. I see that there is an imbalance and inequality between the role the ocean plays and the way it is actually valued and perceived by all the people. And this imbalance needs to be highlighted. And instead of knocking our head against the door of the policymakers, maybe there is a more clever way of moving the masses and get it out like this. And we see all these changes. Again, let's just look at how the environmental awareness has affected and impacted the news these days. And a similar thing can be achieved for the role of the ocean.
Thank you so much, everyone. I actually have a follow-up question to that. So I'm a trained researcher, just finished a year ago. Now I work for NOAA and do something totally different, and I'm more involved in the whole policy, ocean science realm, and trying to get up to speed what's out there, what are people already doing, what has already been done. So I'm pretty early career in this realm. So from what I've heard you're talking about with approaching, policymakers and making sure that stakeholders and everyone knows what the value of the ocean is in their everyday life. What would your recommendation be to someone like me or any early career ocean professional, what they can do to kind of kickstart or support leadership, and at what level do you think we need to encourage, encourage program directors to go talk and make sure that they advocate for the program? Do you think that's enough, or do we need to reach higher?
And Anya had her hand raised for quite a time.
I'll be quick since I've already spoken. I guess just one thing, and this sort of answers your question too, Anne-Christine. I think we need champions. What I'm finding is, for example, once you get an influential champion in one community, the other communities see that and move on board. I mean, this morning, I was emailed from one of our business champions an article in a business magazine that he just submitted about the potential failure of the North Atlantic carbon pump. Astonishing, right? And so then you can have that conversation with such a person and say, who often, some of the senior levels have conversations with policymakers all the time, and say, okay, how can you help us get this on the radar? So I think to your point, Pierre, very important not to just do one thing, because it's not, one thing isn't going to be successful. So Anne-Christine, I would say my answer to your question would be map the landscape, figure out who's talking to whom, and get the right arguments in the right place. Takes a while, but it's a question of getting that landscape map first and not just firing off because you waste energy.
So can I comment on that, Anya? Thank you very much, because that was exactly what was the way I was heading to. The first thing is, why don't we invite policymakers? I mean, I used to be a policymaker myself some time ago, and there aren't many here in this event. And this is basically a policy highest level possible ministerial event. So, you know, the kind of, this is the place. If we were live, you would be talking to ministers and secretaries, national secretaries. So talk to them, ask them what they need, where do they see the value in it? How do you understand that? From an early career, and Christine, I would say, find a job in government for some time, maybe an internship. You know, experience that. You need to understand how that works. It's, you know, you can make a decision in an elevator ride. And it's a life-changing experience. I think that all scientists should, you know, we should trade some time, you know, positions and try that for a little bit so you can understand how those things are. And once again, I think that Juliet was really to the point now again, because those things are not linear. They're not the same elsewhere. So if you have like a large ocean state like Cape Verde, it's much easier for you as a scientist there to reach out for a minister, or even the president, than it is in, you know, countries, more complex countries such as the US or even Brazil. But if you are, and I do agree with Anya that there are champions, there are those scientists that understood how the policy cycle works, how they can influence, where do they influence, and how they get to send their message. But I really think that it's time for us to open up a frank dialogue, talk to your policymaker, talk to the industry, you know, in a peer-to-peer conversation, and try to understand what do they need, what are their values, and finally, just to reach out again for the social scientists, because this feature that Anya brought up as map the landscape, and Christine, there's actually a method to do that. It's called a policy network. And, you know, social scientists do that, like, you know, it's their deal. So once again, let's broaden up this community. Let's talk to other people. And as Piers said, it's not one industry. It's not one scientific community. It's not one policy community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Leticia, you had your hand raised for a while.
Yes, I was going to complete and on, I mean, starting on Pierre's comment. Yes, we have to approach the industry. This is maybe can be like a very particular South American point of view, but we have also to approach policy making, because I mean, in our region here, and I guess the rest of South America is the same. Industry is always looking at what the government is doing all the time, and they never take bigger steps if they don't. If the government's not signaling, oh look, we are doing this or that, whatever, health, economy, or even new environmental action. So it has to go out. It has to go the same. I mean, it's maybe a cultural thing, but I mean, this is, I mean, for South America, I mean, we have to fire on both directions at the same time. That was my comment. Thank you.
I can
continue.
Yes. So I wanted to say, first of all, once I am in a committee that council for the national coastal law, but once we invited someone from the IHAP in the Ministry of Research, and we asked why we cannot get more money for research and ocean research and observations, given that France is really a huge country in terms of EEZ. And the response was, well, the industry is not there. So this is not just a Southern American problem, this is a problem everywhere. And second, I wanted to add that I have been asked to teach in a political science school about the ocean. And this is very important because the students that are not scientists are very, very interested. And the students in 2-3 years, they will be in political cabinets, in industry. So it is really important that we do not teach only to scientists.
So thank you, your hand up next.
Yeah, I'm not able to figure out how to raise the hand there on my configuration here. So on your discussion on early career ocean professionals, I'll offer 2 items specifically. Certainly the decade has a strong focus on early career ocean professionals, and they've got activities and working group. And I'm really proud to say, I'm going to brag a bit about the Marine Technology Society. This past year, we launched an early career ocean professionals section. So that's a global section. And we went one step further, and we also have a vice president for early career ocean professionals on our board. And so we don't have all the answers, as we've just started formulating, what are the needs and how can a professional society be part of the solution. But I'm really excited that, we thought, the board thought it was important enough that we actually have a vice president. So I urge you to get involved both with the decade and certainly you're welcome at the Marine Technology Society, as is everyone out there, because that's how, we can put that structure out there, working together with Guz and Pierre to look at facilitating some industry dialogues. So we talked about how are we going to bring industry into the picture. So there's an effort that we're putting together, and as an activity for the decade, to go over some of those conversations of why isn't industry at the table? What are those issues specifically? And not, and take it one step beyond just that discussion, where we'll look at a particular topic, whether it's market maturity, whether it's data licensing and legal frameworks, and we'll come in with a draft paper of what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, have a panel discussion, and then come out with a curated paper. At the end of, right now, it looks like maybe 6 dialogues, then get together in an in-person session, yet to be determined, where this group can then provide some near and midterm actual recommendations to try to move those issues forward that we all talk about and know about, but how do we actually move them forward? So thank you.
Thank you. I think Christine, you had your hand up, and Pierre, I think you were waving too.
Yeah, thank you. I think one problem at the moment is also that the system of ocean observation is so complex, and especially when it comes to end users or even to governments, it's difficult to see, well, why do I need observation in the south, or why should I invest into observation in general, and so on. And what struck me yesterday, there was a early career professional event, and there were a lot of people talking about different kinds of observation. And in the end, there came one question: where is the data available? I want to use it for hazard investment for my coast. And like my mind went blank, and I thought, like, there is not the data. It's like multiple data, and it's depending where you are, what you want, and so on. So we observationists couldn't answer this very easy question and saying, you find the data there is the plot you want to use. And I think this is something we need to provide. And so to simplify everything and to make it accessible for other stakeholders, and not only for scientists, that we have kind of one data set that we put out for governments and and other cities, and should be as simple as getting a weather forecast. I think this is something important.
Pierre, if you had your hand up, and then
Yes,
up here.
Yes.
I wanted to comment on the role of industry on a private sector, but maybe also to echo to what Kirsten was just saying. I mean, it's very important when you discuss with the user. So I'm not discussing here the policy side, but more the user, in particular for the private sector. It's important that to have services in place. I mean, just to, and then to interact with them. So to provide regular products, regular services, and work with them. The experience we have at Mercator and with the Copernicus Marine Service, so we are working with professional association, I mean, for marine renewable energy, for aquaculture, and so on, where we have this interaction on products matching user needs and so on, and but to build, and this takes a lot of time. At the end, this is essential for the sustainability of the different services that we provide, and that's the voice of industry of the private sector is quite important then to convince government to sustain services. And I say here services on a broad sense, which is observation, modeling services, and so on. So that's extremely important. And again, I think this was mentioned previously, industry and private sector, they are everywhere. It's not only, they're also on the service side, they're also, of course, on the instrumentation, on the use of uptake of products. And it's also fair to recognize that it's a bit more complex and much more complex for in situ observation compared to satellite observation. Because we are not discussing here a lot satellite observation, but we have sustained satellite observation system here. It's probably easier because this is very large investment. The private sector is playing a very important role. So it's not easy, but it's much more difficult for in situ observation. But again, that's the main message is that we need to have, and we need to really to demonstrate how the observation are then used in products. I mean, either models or the other products that serve direct user to then work on sustainability. And that's and you can. It's very difficult if you don't do it to realize what are the needs. I mean, you will be surprised in the Copernicus Marine Service, you know, only 4 or 5 years, we now have 30,000 subscribers to the service. And the most used product today is a global ocean forecasting system that we provide. So it's, of course, it's only a first step, and there are a lot of challenges, but for this part of interaction with the user, with the private sector, it's very essential to have this, the full value chain covered.
Thank you, Perry, at your hand raised.
Yes, further down the line of a matured ocean observing environment, there are many advantages, and unfortunately we don't have time to list them all for the individual groups. But one is definitely evolving, and this will be the environment of operational observing. So this tricky part about whether scientists should maintain the time series or whether scientists are the ones to collect more and more data and do this with their research funding. This is one that will change if more and more data needs to be collected, and that also a little bit links to what Pierre has just said. But I wanted to stress here what Zdenka put out, and this is this Goose MTS dialogue between science, industry, and other stakeholders. And I really would like to stress that you give that some focus and eventually even join these events. And then there are 3 other examples I would just like to name to give you an idea of how the things could develop. And one is, for example, an increased collection of meteorological data from voluntary observing ships. And there is efforts going on to streamline the sharing with the WMO GTS, the Global Telecommunication System, because the WMO is I'd say a little bit more advanced in some aspects, because the whole environment of meteorological data is also on a different level compared to some of our oceanographic data. But this is something that is going on, and that is going to be very exciting. A second aspect is an idea we had earlier, and that is under discussion, and that will also be part of this Goose and MTS environment. And this is an ocean observing agora. a forum or a platform that should support innovation, advancement, and business development in the field of ocean observing, where basically the users and the suppliers can come together and really exchange what is needed, when is it needed, at what accuracy is it needed, etc., to foster and bring back the benefit to the parties. And then another idea was we saw what impact seabed 2030 had as a global movement. And why not take this as an example and advance it in with respect to general acoustic backscatter information? I mean, the vessels are out there, they get the reflection data from the seabed, but why not add acoustic backscatter data to learn more about habitats, about biodiversity and abundance, and bring these things together? And that sort of leads me to my main comment that I would like to leave here, and that's my final message actually as well. We indeed should not think more in this black and white direction, right? We shouldn't say this is industry, this is an industry guy, this is a science guy. We should focus on the problem, sit together and solve it. Just like when there is an issue and you have to solve it as a team, you can do it best with people of various backgrounds. And that's the same thing with the sectors we are from. And I think the decade and the whole discussions we have at the moment point really in this direction and show this. However, events like the decade also show that there is many things we still have to do. And just like yesterday, when there was this launch, there was a small question asked to the participants: what question should be discussed next? And one of the possible answers was, how could industry get involved more and push the things forward? And one of the first comments was, have we been hijacked by industrial lobbyists? And I was like, I couldn't believe it. Why? What a nonsense statement at that point. But this still shows that we have to break down those silos and really focus on the targets in a really focused manner. And in that respect, I appreciate all the chances where we can communicate besides those strict boundaries. Thank you.
There was a question in the chat that I just wanted to raise because you kind of touched upon that. And that was, what about the concept of operational oceanography? Don't you think it would provide a more direct communication with stakeholders and society in general? So that was a question in the chat, but kind of directed towards that is another question on whether to bring everyone together from all these different sectors and have these conversations. Should we define specific like topic areas that are of interest from everyone to kind of kickstart these kind of conversations? And I thought that would go well together with that question. Anyhow, Toster, you had your hand raised, so please go ahead.
So thank you, and it's really related to that question in the chat box and to comments made by both Christine and Per. They related to metrology and services that we are, we're used to get from our Met services. And in the parallel to the ocean observing, whereas in the metrology, 3/4 or 2/3 of the observing system is on a sustained base. It's done by agencies with long-term funding. Whereas in the ocean, it's probably 1/3 that is funded by that, or maybe less in some countries. And I think if we really think as this as sustained ocean observing and forecasting system delivery services for society, we are moving away from that science research project thinking more towards that operational oceanography. And if you talk to people that do operational oceanography, the operational definition is actually delivering some kind of service on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be that forecast for the next hours or the next week. It could be an assessment that you produce every few years even. That is part of operation. So in a way, then a sustained observing in operational oceanography is really pretty much the same thing. And by doing that, we have a chance to break that barrier, I think, between getting funding for science projects and getting sustainability. I think the answer is in thinking in this as a research infrastructure. And in GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System is really trying to get all the actors together and communicate with one voice on the benefits of producing and supporting such a system rather than going for individual research projects. This will be immensely important to drive the innovation of the observing system forward. But anyway, and I'd like to go back to one comment here on the early career. I really like to have more early career scientists involved in this. And one of the things that is difficult for early career, I think, is that the career path as a scientist is really how many scientific papers you write, you know, that curriculum, and engaging in this kind of group and these meetings doesn't really give you any CVs, you know, any publications and papers. So we need to change that incentive and career path. It's not all about writing papers. It's about it's about, you know, communicating and making something good for society. So there's a bigger challenge to take up to the higher levels of the educational ministries on how to reward efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tosta. And I appreciate that last comment a lot, as I'm still finishing my papers. Zdenka, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, so certainly on the very last topic, I think, you know, that has been brought up time and time again. What are the incentives and how do we change those incentives? So I think there is that movement growing. Going back to even the conversation of operational oceanography, I think the term operational is also problematic. So when we talked, you know, this conversation has come up within the previous work that and I guess I still do it for the US group on Earth observations. And Argo is the classic example. You know, when you talk about Argo, it operates every single day, but it is funded out of research infrastructure money within NOAA. It is supporting a research infrastructure and forecasts every day. So in 2014, when we wrote the first national plan for Earth observations in the United States, we tried to go to sustained and experimental. Sustained observations for public mission and sustained observation for Earth science research. And that was observations that had funding for, you know, greater than 7 years. And then you had experimental, which was the campaign. Now, part of that had to do with, in the United States, on allowing organizations like NASA and the National Science Foundation to fund long-term infrastructure, either satellite missions or infrastructure in situ missions. But we've struggled with getting that language adopted. And so I think that, but I think it is important, as soon as we go to operational oceanography, you start to alienate one group. If we talk about research, we alienate other groups. So we try to look at sustained observing for both public missions as well as Earth science research. So I put that out here to this group for consideration to start to change the language on how we talk about these things.
If I may just add a very short comment on this, I think it was mentioned already by Tosta. It really depends on the definition you have on operational oceanography. It's just making sure that you have the delivery of systematic information and so on. And it's also on the research is also one of the user in that case. So, but okay.
Thank you. Anya, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just a comment to follow on from both, I think, Zdenka's and Tosta's comments. One of the things, when Tosta and I were invited as co-chairs of GOOSE to talk to the American Meteorological Society, one of the things that they highlighted to us was that they have a precipitation grand challenge where they are struggling to predict El Niños and La Niñas, absolutely fundamental cycles, and they can't predict precipitation in the southern and western United States. And that's because they don't have enough ocean temperature data. So when we talk about the WMO and the need to sort of get oceanographic observations, on a better footing as the WMO has done successfully, I think we need to start that conversation by stepping towards these, what I was calling mission-based, there's different terms for it, but the pitching towards things like the ocean carbon sink, the precipitation grand challenge. What do we need to do to close that gap? Have that conversation very specifically so we can show ourselves to be useful. And that in a way can support a number of different styles and types of observing systems. And I think that once we start to get that kind of attention, then we start to step towards sustainability.
Thank you so much, Anya. Are there any comments specifically on this question at this point? Awesome. I'm just checking the time and we're running out of time. So I wanted to just make sure that anyone had a chance to talk, and if you had any final comments before we go into the closing remarks and finalize or conclude the session. No pressure. Awesome. Well, I put all the links that I have mentioned before, the UN Decade launch, the different statements I talked about earlier. I put them all in the chat earlier, also my email address. So if there's any follow-up questions or you need a question answered or need some contacts, please let me know. Thank you everyone for attending this meeting. 1 second. We definitely heard a ton of good information, recommendations, and I really appreciate all of your time and opinions on this. As Juliet said, it takes a village to raise this Atlantic Ocean basin scale observing system to where it should be. And I hope that with the decade and all the different initiatives that are going on right now, we can actually make a change and get to where we want to be. I definitely owe a big thanks to the conference organizers and the Portuguese presidency for allowing us to convene this side event and for hosting this on their website. I definitely owe a big thanks to all the panelists and the speakers for your amazing input on all of this and enjoying all my questions. Thank you to Sandra Kirohaka, who's been the repertoire, and Jessica for helping me moderate this session. Thank you for all the attendees, and let me know if you have any questions. And with that, I'm concluding this session.
Thank you, Anne-Christine, for your very able moderation.
Yes, thank you for all the organizers. Thank you for the moderators. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.